What is up, YouTube? I almost forgot my trusty cup. But anyways, today is Tuesday, so we're going to be talking a little bit more about crypto. We've got a lot of interesting things on the horizon. So we're going to have Tim back on the channel. We're going to chat through just what we kind of see going on in regards to Bitcoin in particular. That's usually what we're really chatting about when I say crypto. And looking forward to just Tim's got some interesting charts for us to check out. I want to explore the recent news around Coinbase and their filings and some of those implications for potentially both the Bitcoin market as well as just the long-term trajectory of everything we're looking at. And there's a couple other things I'm interested in exploring. Recently, the Von Mises Institute had an article discussing, Morocco banned crypto, I think 3 years ago or 3 or 4 years ago. And essentially, did that impact adoption in any way, or did it actually increase adoption? So we're going to explore all those stories and more today with Tim. So let me bring Tim on. Hey, Tim, how's it going?
I'm great. Thanks, Matt. How are you?
Doing good. So where do you want to start? I think let's kind of start with your chart, actually, because I think that's a pretty cool thing to explore and dive into. So everyone just kind of pay attention and let's pull this up. And do you mind just kind of breaking down for us, Tim? What is it that you've got up for us?
Definitely. So this is the Bitcoin rainbow price chart. And this is building on a model. I'm going to get all the names wrong here, but Plan B on Twitter has put forward a model for pricing Bitcoin that relies on some ideas from the gold community called stock to flow, meaning how much gold is out there and how much gold can they make. And that should help determine a market price. And so with Bitcoin, we know how much Bitcoin exists and we know how much Bitcoin is coming. We just need to help understand the demand for it. And so this chart lays out the price of Bitcoin by halving, which is the supply shock that comes every 4 years to Bitcoin. And then it overlays the average pricing on a logarithmic scale. And it's not a linear scale. So if you just note here, the pricing is going up by tens, not in a linear way. You can see the sort of band or this rainbow arc of the price moving up steadily in log scale, which is a bigger move for every small increment vertically. And that when it sort of goes out of these bands, it is in the sort of real bubble territory, because people have been saying Bitcoin's in a bubble now for the 12 years it's been around. It doesn't really ring true most of the time, but some of the time it is true. Sometimes Bitcoin's over its skis and it needs to kind of calm down a little. So most of the people I've been speaking to lately have been still sitting on the sidelines with some knowledge now of Bitcoin, thinking, well, yeah, that's great. Bitcoin is cool and all, but at 72,000 Canadian or 73,000 Canadian, I'm just going to wait for it to come down a little. And that may or may not ever happen. This pricing here is in US dollars, so we can see sort of 58,000 now. And we may run up to somewhere in the 150,000 or 200,000 kind of realm before it crashes back down to 70,000 or 60,000 US, depending on your dollar. So though I wouldn't trust any chart, because as soon as you feel like you've got a good handle on where the market is going, the whole market has the same chart, and it won't be exactly the same, but it definitely feels like we're in a fairly stable price position here at 70,000 Canadian. So with all of the good news coming, all of the good news we've had, almost every day there are significant market participants doing something cool in the Bitcoin space. And again, I keep saying I do 3 to 4 hours of research a day. I can't come close to scratching the surface. It must be because there's something special going on here with Bitcoin.
Yeah, it definitely feels like, to a degree, there's a certain critical mass of the news cycle where it just feels like stories are stacking in a lot of different directions. But taking a step back before we go off in a tangent here, do you mind just breaking down for everyone the halving, what that means and like why that's important to this chart?
Right. So Bitcoin was set up with somewhat arbitrary issuance or somewhat arbitrary inflation schedule. And that was sort of set in stone at the time that the protocol was created. And where the libertarian types really love this is because it's programmed in advance. We know what to expect, and the government can't change it in terms of how much money we're going to get to use. So every 4 years, that supply schedule is cut in half. And right now it's, I believe, 6.25 Bitcoin per block mined. And that's now after 3 halvings. And so in 4 years, that will have again creating a supply shock on or around the January 2024. And those are programmatically by the number of blocks, not by a calendar date or time. So while we do know when it will happen, the precision with which we know when it will happen gets closer and closer to the time that it happens, because all of the averaging of the block time evens itself out. So that block that comes every 10 minutes on average, you may get 6 an hour, one hour, you may get 5, you may get 3, you may get 2, but you know that the blockchain will catch up eventually. So, in about 3 years, those miners will now get 3 and a bit Bitcoin per block. So you can see that's why there's this intense race or demand in the early part of the cycle to accumulate Bitcoin. And when you're accumulating and no one is selling, the only outlet for that demand pressure is to increase the price, and why Bitcoin has number go up technology.
Yeah, and the reason why it happens in that period right after kind of the halving is simply you've literally just restricted the supply more, right? So it's harder to get those. So inherently, it puts pressure on the price. And I think what we often see is once there's some pressure on the price, a lot of people start piling in. And then again, what seems, and I know that this is again not unique really to Bitcoin, but sort of is the concept that there may in theory be a larger subset of the users of it that aren't day trading, right? Like that there's potentially large chunks of it that essentially are like illiquid, as in just like not really even participating in the market as well, which when you look at it and you see that 18 something million Bitcoins sounds like a lot, but then you start to realize like, oh, like is Tesla really playing with theirs? Is MicroStrategy really playing with theirs? Is the wallet with whatever the million that Satoshi had, right? Like all those sort of things all of a sudden starts to be like, oh, well, there's actually a much smaller float than I think what people might at first just kind of jump to that assumption with. And we've mentioned it before, but also the idea that potentially as much as like 10, 20% of the Bitcoin supply might not be accessible.
That's right. Yeah. Lost in a boating accident. But some of it genuinely so.
Yeah.
And it's just always important to remember that for the most part, the Bitcoin network works regardless of the price. So, you can take an anti-capitalist viewpoint around the technology and say, oh, well, yeah, these people don't deserve to make money or get rich. But that doesn't stop you from using this powerful monetary network and money system just because you don't get to buy a full Bitcoin. I mean, the number of Satoshis that you can get is a totally practical system to send money anywhere in the world at record low prices, even when the network is relatively congested. So
yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how even that develops, right? Will we always be really talking in Bitcoins, or if you start to see a more mass adoption by just the general population, will we start to see maybe them marking it in 100 Satoshis or 10,000 Satoshis equals this, rather than necessarily like 1 Bitcoin equals that? Because there is certain like irrational friction, right, to certain things like that. So especially once you start to get the masses involved.
Unit bias is real for sure. I just got an email from one of my web vendors that they're having a 50-year anniversary sale for email. And when you start to think that there are people you still can't get to email you, that, lawyers are still running off fax machine and doctors' offices are still running off fax machine, 50 years later, we haven't reached peak email yet. I mean, maybe we have slightly because we're doing less spam or whatever you want to, however you want to measure that. But we're very early, 12 years into Bitcoin in terms of what the technology is capable of and how we're going to adapt our the real world use cases, whether that's in Bitcoin or Sats or whatever the case is, or Lightning Network on top.
And before I bring up some things I want to chat with you about, Tim, just want to share this. Alan was just saying, be careful as projections have really developed since 2018 and almost everyone's invested in Bitcoin. Has the same info. Absolutely, Alan. And I think you probably just joined right after Tim said that. So 100%, I don't think any of us are predicting specific timings of events or exact pricings. I think on a really long enough scale, we're both very bullish, but on a short enough scale, it gets pretty muddy and difficult to really predict with any accuracy.
There's been a whole trend of, was the halving priced in or not? And we can see that it probably wasn't. So though with Bitcoin, perfect information exists, the code is auditable, all of Satoshi's writings are available, every block's history is out there, most people simply won't do the homework to understand it all. So yeah, while we'd like to believe in the efficient market hypothesis, I think the adaptive market is probably more like it. And there's lots of opportunity here still.
Yeah, and actually, this is going to be stealing a little bit from a speech I'm going to give later tonight, but I recently just had my team, we do like bi-weekly book clubs, and the book club we just finished was a Rational Ritual. And in that book, one of the real interesting things they discuss and explore is the idea of game theory and common knowledge. And, you know, there's such a fascinating development here, I think, in common knowledge in regards to what's going on with Bitcoin, right? Like, I legitimately feel like, to a degree for myself, I felt like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense on the surface. I just need to see more signals of common knowledge from the general populace that they're in. And then once I started seeing general signals or common knowledge, like from Tesla, or when like basketball teams are like, yeah, we'll pay you in Bitcoin, or we'll transfer your pay into Bitcoin and things of that nature. All those different little things are just additional signals of common knowledge. And again, you start to see like things like Yahoo Finance or other articles and mainstream sources that usually would be very skeptical, starting to, you know, parrot the 1% Bitcoin allocation and things like that. So I think it's just a really fascinating moment in time, you know, whether you look at this year, this decade, this whatever, but just seeing in general how people are reacting and adapting to what's currently going on in this space, right? Mm-hmm. And you brought up one thing that I wanted to chat a little bit about is libertarians and Bitcoin. And for some reason, I thought that like, I don't really roll with a lot of like actual libertarians and political organizations, but I've been shocked by the lack of just rubber stamping. I thought there would be a lot of political libertarian organizations that would just be rubber stamping Bitcoin and loving it. But it actually seems interesting that there's not nearly as much positivity or information around it as I suspected. And part of that might just be, you know, some of Bitcoin's proponents are also at times standoffish or like to poke people. But I found it interesting that I don't see nearly as many articles on Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, even in general, or blockchain really, and libertarian. So when I did see an article come up on the Mises Institute, I did want to just kind of pull it up and chat about it. And this is something that's been going on for a while as well, because when Satoshi set up his like birthday, right, I believe he put April 5th as the date. And that's the date that, if I remember correctly, FDR passed his anti-gold ownership. And then he put 1975, was it, which is when it became legal then again to acquire gold as an individual citizen. And so I won't bore everyone with the details of this article, but, you know, it explores the concept of what occurred in Morocco. And there was just a link to a CoinDesk brief little article here about what's going on in Morocco and looking at kind of the volume and trading and on two of the larger platforms, I guess, that are used there. And I just found it interesting because I definitely couldn't point to a moment in time where you're like, oh, clearly that's when they banned it. And obviously government intervention can stop this thing. And, you know, we're looking back in 2017. So from November 2017 to February 2021, I think is when the ban's been going that they've got up here on the chart for us. And again, when you look at that, like November 2017 is going to be around this area here. And I really don't see much. Like, obviously we kind of ended that bull run and it seems like it just kind of stuck until we got into the new bull run. And then you really see mass adoption again. So I just kind of wanted to point that out because it's always interesting to see this. But I guess anything that you want to add on that, Tim, or had you heard much talk about what had happened in Morocco either today or back in the day?
No, certainly I haven't heard anything about Morocco in particular. That is the yellow chart. Sorry, just the way I have my screen set up, it's so far away. The yellow chart is Bitcoin volume and the blue chart is
So the two charts are two different trading platforms. So one is called Local Bitcoins, which is the more popular, and then the other's Paxful. But I guess those are two of the popular exchanges or ways for peer-to-peer trading
I see.
in Morocco.
Weekly in Morocco, yeah.
Yeah. So again, I found it just interesting. There's not a lot of case studies about governments coming in, directly banning it, and then us being able to see the general adoption or reaction. But one other big thing that I was mentioning earlier was Coinbase's filing. Man, my tongue is just not working for me today. But now would be the 17th largest bank when viewed through assets, with their 223 billion in assets. And recently there's been the narrative that there's about $2 trillion in crypto out there right now, right? With Bitcoin making up the lion's share of it. But again, now to see that Coinbase, essentially, that's like 10%, 11% of the market I saw people floating around with. And again, that's just fascinating to me to see how quickly this market's evolving and adapting, that, you could essentially become the 17th largest bank without, I don't know Coinbase's whole background, but it's not like they acquired a bunch of banks in order to become the big bank, right? That's usually, when you get to that size, it's usually not going to be an innovator that creates something brand new that just takes over the financial industry or banks in general. But it's fascinating to see just the amount of assets out there, right? And in this last quarter, I believe their gross earnings was greater than their earnings for the previous year. I saw some tweets on as well. So again, just found this is all just a really interesting time. And again, I want to just kind of re-emphasize for those at home, just because I'm talking about it now doesn't mean that I think it's guaranteed to go up or it's the number one investment that you all need to drop everything and get into. But I really do think this is the time you need to drop any preconceived notions and just spend some time getting familiar with it, understanding it. I think that it's a smart time to learn just how to buy that first little chunk, whether it's like $5 or $50 or whatever you arbitrarily decide of Bitcoin. I think it's a good time to just go through the motions and just kind of get a feel for it, because I think it's rare that someone goes 100% in from 0 to 100, and it's that warming up, right? And I think this is a good time to warm up. Again, you don't necessarily need to bet your entire farm on it, but I think you should invest some time. And again, I think it's cool, Tim, that you're investing such a significant proportion of your time, right? 2 to 3 hours a day, just trying to see what's up. So for anyone else that's maybe looking at jumping into this now, any other resources you'd like to recommend? I know every week we kind of bring some up, but I still think that there's a lot of people that probably only watch one of these and don't necessarily go back and watch previous ones.
Sure. If you're looking for the academic route, if you search blockchain courses or Bitcoin courses on Google, you'll find real universities offering real courses for free. And it will help you not fall into the hype, fall victim to some of the hype, because I was doing a little presentation earlier today showing that, there's 3 tiers maybe of Bitcoin education that are out there, which is one, tried and true academic organizations like MIT or Stanford. Then there's the commercial education platforms like the Udemy's and the Coursera's and that sort of thing, which typically have good information. Otherwise, they'd have bad course ratings and things like that. And then there's just YouTube. So, there's absolutely no filter, and there's all kinds of bad ideas that are out there. And as much as Matt and I are publishing here weekly, we cannot stem the tide of bad info and junk suggestions that are out there regarding Bitcoin. And again, when folks the first time they hear about it was the Silk Road, and the next time they hear about it was Mt. Gox, and then now they're hearing about 9 other scams. And it really, again, Canadians may not need Bitcoin, but I think Bitcoin would benefit from having as many people paying real attention to what's happening, rather than just these sensational news media stories that kind of sour your taste about it. So yeah, I like those in that order. Again, the real stuff that's out there in academics, and then everything from there.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. And I think it is important to understand that there is so much information out there that I think where you should always start is with that white paper, maybe bullish case for Bitcoin or some other sort of resource. I know a lot of people, the idea of like just jumping into Twitter or Clubhouse or Discord chats and stuff like that sounds very foreign or scary. But I think just ease into it, guys, right? Like follow a few people on Twitter, read a white paper, throw $50 randomly at it. All those things just help build up familiarity, right? And so I thought we'd cover this question from Alan as well. So, and Alan was just asking here, I don't think, oh, that's not the one I wanted. Where was this? Alan was, I'll come to that back though, Alan. What do you think of NFT usage and fractional ownership of rental properties allow more people to invest in one particular multi-unit residential without REITs? Yeah, so I think right now there's a lot of interesting, innovative ideas that people are playing with that they haven't necessarily sat down with regulators and got their okay with. And so I have no doubt that very soon, I'm sure someone's going to come up with some novel ideas and just run with it. But it's important we understand, again, like we talked about, I think a month ago, about like what occurred with that one guy that launched his own token that bought a bunch of real estate in Grand Bend. You know, just because no one cracks down on immediately doesn't mean it's not going to be considered like an illegal security or some sort of complex financial instrument that can't just be offered to the general public. So I think really long term, there's some interesting opportunities there, Alan, but I think it will take a few runs at it before you're going to get regulators on board with it. But I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities there. And again, like obviously it sounds like, Alan, you're relatively familiar with all this stuff. So I'm not necessarily talking to you with this next point, but I am just to the general audience. For those of you that are interested in whatever, right? You heard someone, and some of these things I'm going to say kind of cringing, but like you heard someone talk about BitCloud, or you heard someone talk about BitConnects back in 2017, or, you know, you hear someone talking about certain NFTs right now or whatever. Again, it's cool to go experiment with those. I think it's important that most people view that as gambling money, right? The same way that back when I was 18, 19, got into stocks, and I knew that when I opened up that account with my first $1,000, like I, even at that age, knew that that was tuition. I was secretly crossing my fingers. I was like, I'm probably smarter than everyone else, so it's probably going to work out, but there's a chance it doesn't work out for me. You're almost always going to go through that experience, guys. So it's so funny for me. I see my young wholesalers going through it in their early 20s. They're getting some disposable income now and like dabbling with different cryptocurrencies or different NFTs or all kinds of various stocks and options and things of that nature. And again, I think it's just important whenever you first start playing with these things that we're always playing with money we can afford to lose. So also for anyone that decides, you know, you hear about crazy NFT that's going to change the way Canadian real estate works, I really encourage you to only put money into that you can absolutely afford to lose. And I think any money you put into BitCloud, you should almost already just have that expectation. But I, again, love to get your thoughts and opinions on that, Tim, but I think just get started, right? Like get comfortable with the concept, because I think it's such a foreign idea for a lot of people that don't play in the space.
Yeah, no, I mean, if that type of question is coming from somebody, I would assume they already have a Bitcoin position that represents a material stake in their portfolio. But if you're on the sidelines and watching that question be asked, know that if you haven't even thought about Bitcoin, but you're on Matt's channel from a real estate perspective, talking about NFTs for fractional ownership of multifamily is like light years ahead of where you need to start. Consider and start understanding the technology behind Bitcoin, why people say Bitcoin is not regulated, but in fact, it is the most regulated asset in the world, and how far away the regulators are from being ready to do, again, multifamily real estate on the blockchain, whether that's the identity problem, which is a problem inherent with computer science, whether it's the Oracle problem, which is a problem inherent with blockchain and Bitcoin, and then 9 other regulatory issues related to securities and syndicate financing type of arrangements. Just because there's a new technology and it's nifty, like literally NFT, it doesn't mean that what you're doing isn't just an association or a partnership agreement or a corporation by another name. So even if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, the regulators will find that you are just doing something that you could have done with a lawyer and an accountant on your side in 15 minutes rather than this complicated cumbersome technology product that wasn't designed to represent a real world asset. So, there are plenty of people that have thought long and hard about this. And if you just need to take the first step with Bitcoin, start there. And if you're interested in building something as crazy as that, there are people on that case already, which is not to say don't try, but seek them out, find out the challenges that they're running into and how you can add to that. Because long term, I do think it's the way we'll go, but we're going to take, again, the email is now 50 years old and you still can't get lawyers to do email sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's crazy, that email fact. That's still feels like such a thing that just kind of came here. But I just wanted to hit this point that Alan had. I don't think Coinbase can be counted as the 17th largest bank since they don't have the ability to use fractional reserve banking. Yeah, so I think there's a few ways to interpret that. Obviously, I'm using it, and I think most of the people on Twitter were using it in a very specific way to say like the amount of deposits that they've got on hand. But I think still it's fascinating to me to see that shift, right? Because the moment you've got like custody over that to whatever degree you do, you've got some influence, right? But you've also just got one of the larger places that people are going to look to now as a leader of kind of anything, right? Like when you've got 10% of the crypto market. So again, I'm not saying that like all banks need to quiver in fear now because of what Coinbase is doing, but I do think it's just a very interesting development that 10 years ago, I don't think would have been really on the vast majority of our radar. The idea that something like that could occur the way it did, right? Without necessarily a lot of big players backing it, without a lot of acquisitions or mergers to get those deposits. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all evolves. So before we wrap up here, Tim, any other last thoughts or recommendations for the audience?
No, I mean, maybe another one to check out, depending on how far down the rabbit hole you are, is I believe it's 21 Lessons by Gigi. And if you search that up, you'll find it. Very, very well recommended piece about Bitcoin that you can take some lessons that were learned along the way from a more experienced Bitcoiner.
Awesome. Yeah, really appreciate that. And again, just want to encourage you guys, go out there, start getting a little bit more informed. Don't blindly just bet on anything, but I think this is the time to start doing some more research and just really interested to see what keeps evolving in this space. And for those of you guys that missed it, you missed out on a really cool Clubhouse chat earlier this weekend when Michael Saylor was on. So I didn't get to see a lot of it, but it was really interesting to hear his perspective on a few things, Tim, that maybe we'll chat a bit about after the show. But it was just interesting to hear his speculation. So one thing I do want to ask of the audience, if any of you guys know anyone that like records a lot of these Clubhouse chats that are temporary and transient and then re-uploads them on YouTube, please let me know, or whatever Discord chat or wherever, if I can track these things down, because I only caught like the last 10 minutes. And apparently it was a 1 hour chat. So any of you guys that are better at the internet than me, let me know how to get better at the internet in the comment section. All right. Thanks, guys. Make sure you follow along with me and Tim on Twitter. And hopefully Tim will be back next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.